So continuing in chapter 10, just a brief review before we get into a little new material. The chapter is about capacity, capacity management, the ability of a machine or an entire company or a worker or a process to produce product, and that could be a good or a service. So yesterday we spoke a little bit about theoretical capacity, and you will remember that that's kind of capacity in a perfect world, the maximum rate of output that can be produced in a period of time under ideal operating conditions. And then we went on to say that that rarely happens. Why does that rarely happen? Well, because things go wrong, right? Second law of thermodynamics, everything tends toward destruction. If you don't brush your teeth will rot, fall out, right? If you don't manage a process, it will deteriorate. If you don't eat right, exercise nutrition and proper rest and relaxation, etc., your body will start to degenerate. So everything tends toward destruction if it's left alone. That's the second law of thermodynamics. So not surprisingly, the theoretical capacity left to itself, it's going to go awry. Things will go wrong. Employees will be absent. They'll get tired. You'll have equipment breakdowns. People will not get stuff to you on time. And so that's the reality of the workplace, correct? So we talked about how to calculate a theoretical capacity. It's fairly straightforward math. I won't go through this again, but this is, if nothing wrong happened, how many transmissions could a transmission factory with 2 shifts produce given certain parameters? And we went through the math on that, and you can tell it's basically just straightforward multiplication. Then we also talked about just reiterating that idea that theoretical capacity typically cannot be achieved because of all the things that are going to go wrong. So that brings us up to effective capacity, or possibly you could call that capacity management in the real world. So effective capacity is the actual capacity that can be reasonably expected to be achieved in the long run under normal working conditions. And of course, a big factor, as we said yesterday, in actual capacity is this thing called setup time. Typically, when the restaurant opens, it doesn't just magically come to life, right? There's a lot of things that have to be done to bring that restaurant up to speed in order to serve customers, right? When a faculty person walks into a classroom, it doesn't just magically come to life. There's a lot of things that have to happen to basically start the educational process. Machines have to be calibrated, reset before you begin to make the product, right? So that's what we mean by setup time. What does it take before you can actually start rendering the service or making the product? So we talked about long setup times and short setup times, and typically you would prefer short rather than long because it makes you more efficient. So capacity provides the ability to satisfy the demand by your customer base. So capacity planning has to be based on effective, which just means realistic capacity rather than theoretical capacity. To satisfy customers in the long run, effective capacity must be at least as large as the average demand. So here's an example of safety capacity. And safety capacity is the cushion that you need. And I think we went over this also yesterday. So it refers to it like a pad or a capacity cushion or a safety capacity. The amount that you have reserved for unanticipated events. So a sudden increase in demand, a material shortage so that suddenly you can't make something, equipment breakdowns, etc. So this is fairly straightforward math, and it went back to the idea of the transmission factory. Theoretical capacity is equal to safety capacity plus effective capacity. So if effective capacity is 15,000 transmissions per month, that's the realistic number, not the ideal number of 16,000, then your safety capacity or your cushion would be equal to the theoretical minus the effective, or 16,000 minus 15,000. So you'd have a safety capacity of 1,000 transmissions per month to cover for things like a material shortage, an equipment breakdown, etc. The next thing we want to talk about, and I don't think we got into this too much yesterday, is the idea of a work order. A work order. A work order is a written specification of work to be performed for a customer or for a client. Typically, a work order will include several things: the quantity that is to be produced, the processing requirements, and all the resources that are necessary to provide that work. So an example would be hospital surgery. That requires a new setup for each unit or each surgery. So if you're looking at a surgery as a work order for a surgery, the order size would be 1, because every time you do a new surgery, you have to sanitize the room, you have to have special equipment, you have to have certain staff there, etc. So it's not like an assembly line. You have to redo everything every surgery. So let's take a look here at measuring capacity. And if you're following along here, this is going to be, let me flip backwards here. This is going to be your page 266, also 268, kind of the idea of measuring capacity. So the capacity required for one work order is typically in a formula is written as C sub I. That means the capacity for one work order. And that's going to be equal to the setup time, S sub I, plus the processing time, P for processing, P sub I, times the order size, Q. So that's where C is equal to the capacity requirements in units of time for work order I. The S is the setup or changeover time for work order I as a fixed amount that does not vary with volume. P is equal to the processing time for each unit of work. And then Q is equal to the size of the order in number of units. So here is a fairly simple example of that. And I was thinking about this because of the classroom that I'm teaching in. A college classroom will hold classes for approximately 1.5 hours per class, hour and a half per class. Between each one of the classes, the room has to be sanitized and it has to be cleaned to reduce the spread of the virus. Because in a lot of our classrooms, they're not totally empty. You have some people joining online, you have some people joining face-to-face. So this takes, a typo there, that's supposed to be takes, not talks. This takes about 0.5 hours or a half an hour to do the cleaning. And by the way, that's why the schedule for all the classes changed this semester, is they had to build in setup time for all the classes so that when a class exits, then the classroom can be set up or clean and sanitized for the next group coming in. So that was precipitated all the changes in the schedule. So 3 classes are planned for this specific room. So then the question is, what's the time capacity? How much time must the room be available for these courses? So using equation 10-2, which is over on your page 266, C, or capacity, is equal to the setup time plus the processing time, and then you add those together and then multiply times the order size, or Q. So in this case, the setup time is a half an hour, 30 minutes. So that's 0.5 hours, plus the processing time, how long it takes to actually do the activity, that's 1.5 hours, because the class meets for an hour and a half. And then the number of units is 3 different courses. So the order size would not be 1, it would be 3. So then you have 0.5 hours plus 1.5 is 2, and 2 times 3 would be 6. So the capacity of the room would be equal to 6 hours. That means the room must be available at least 6 hours to accomplish all this work. So a fairly straightforward, easy example there of capacity measurement. Now, let's take another look at a different twist to capacity measurement. And this is when you have a known service rate. You might be able to see this a little better if you look directly at your textbook, page 268, middle of the page. So I'm going to flip over here so I can read it a little easier myself. So it says, a College of Business has an IT support staff in the computer lab. Consultants receive numerous requests for questions and help. Each request takes an average of 5 minutes. So that means each consultant is talking to somebody for 5 minutes. And there are an average of 25 requests per hour. So a part is, suppose that there are 3 lab consultants. How many students can the support staff handle each hour? And then the B question is, if the lab is expanded and the college anticipates 120 requests per hour, how many consultants will be needed? So in the solve problem, you don't use the equation that we used previously. You do not use equation 10.1. You use equation 10.4. 10.4, which is on one of these pages. Oh, there it is, the top of 268. Capacity equals service rate times the number of servers. That's at the top of your page 268. So using that equation, your capacity equals service rate times the number of servers. The capacity, that is the request per hour, is going to equal 12 requests per hour, because in an hour you have 5 minutes, so 5 into 60 would be 12. So 12 requests per hour per consultant times 3 consultants means 36 requests per hour. And then the B part, again, using the same equation, 10.4, you would have 100. What if you wanted, there's an influx of requests and it goes up to 120 per hour. So you would say the capacity of 120 requests per hour is going to equal 12 requests per hour per consultant times the unknown number of consultants, right? So then you would do some, basically some algebraic functions there, and you would say the number of consultants is going to equal the 120 requests per hour times 12 divided by 12 requests per hour per consultant. 120 divided by 12 would give you 10 consultants. So that means if you have this increase to 120 requests per hour, because maybe that's near final exams and people need more help, then you're going to have 10 consultants, not 3. So a really good example there of capacity measurement with known service rates. And by the way, that would be useful at, say, a tax preparation office when they know exactly about how long it takes to help somebody with their taxes, or a dental office just for cleaning. They know exactly about how long it takes to clean someone's teeth, etc. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about long-term capacity strategies, long-term capacity strategies. So this addresses the trade-off between the cost of capacity, which could be building like a new building, and then the opportunity cost of not having adequate capacity. So you'll know from, remember from economics, opportunity cost is the thing you give up if you do something else. So example would be if you're in college full time and you are not working, there is an opportunity cost there because you're not working, therefore you're not making money. But in the long run, you'd say, well, it's going to be worth it because in the future I'll make more money. So yes, there is an opportunity cost to almost everything. So it's the long-term capacity basically balances these two ideas, the trade-off between the cost of building, expanding the capacity against the opportunity cost. If we don't, what are we going to lose? So here's an example of long-term capacity decision. And this is very relevant to our area around here, anywhere in East Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, etc., over in other parts of the South, Alabama, Georgia. This is the International Paper Mill in Franklin, Virginia. So they have had a capacity of 600,000 tons of paper per year. But as we all know, things are going digital, right? So people will send emails rather than snail mail. They have tablets rather than paper and pencil. We send text messages rather than paper reports. So basically, demand for paper fell 30%. And then they did the math, they did some predictions, and the prognosis was demand is going to continue to fall. So what did they do? They did not want all this excess capacity sitting there costing them a lot of money, so they simply closed the plant. That is a long-term capacity decision. By the way, this has happened at Kilgore College. If you talk to someone who's been around here for several years, you will notice that we have fewer buildings today than we did 10 years ago. A lot of this goes back to a capacity research project that was done under the previous president, where consultants came in and looked at all of the square footage of all the buildings all over the campus. Now, this is everything from the Duvall Student Center to the Woodfin Technology Building to the Rangerette Museum, classrooms, engineering science buildings, etc. So with about 5,000 students or so, they compared our physical brick and mortar capacity, by the way, which has to be maintained, to the physical capacity of sister schools that had about 5,000 students. Now, I'm just curious, what do you think they found in that research study? Do you think they found that we had too little capacity, too much capacity, or it was just about right? Somebody activate your audio and tell me what you think they found. Too little, too much, or just about right?
Too much.
Too much.
So Brittany and Daisy both say too much. Anybody want to agree with them?
This is Bridget. I agree too much.
Yeah, you do agree too much. You should actually be a little more resistant sometimes. No, I was just joking. Anybody else? Anybody want to go for maybe it was just about right, or maybe too little capacity? Anybody want to vote for that?
I think it's too little.
No vote? Too little. Jacob goes with too little. Well, here was the conclusion of the research project. For a physical campus of about 5,000 students, we were way over in our physical capacity. And of course, I guess in a way, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. So just back off and look at the big picture. Kilgore College, as a 2-year institution, we have 2 museums. Now, most campuses don't even have one. We have the Oil Museum, and we have a Rangerette Museum. We have multiple gymnasiums. We had classrooms that weren't even classroom buildings that were not even being used. There was a huge building right across the street in the mall area right now, which is the Grassy Mall, and it was called the LA building, the Ivan Liberal Arts Building. It was ancient of days. It had sick building syndrome. It wasn't even being used anymore. What happened to it? Basically, they razed it, R-A-Z-E-D. They just tore it down, and now it's a grassy mall. And that process is continuing even to this day. There are other buildings being decommissioned and sold off because we had too large a footprint for the number of customers that we had. So why is that important? Because you have to heat, you have to cool, you have to maintain. It costs you an incredible amount of money to basically support a physical footprint. And by the way, that is the problem right now with Best Buy as a chain. They have too many large brick and mortar stores. They wish they didn't have them, right? They wish they had small stores that would just allow people to buy online and pick up at the store, because they're having to pay rent and maintenance, etc. So too much long-term capacity will kill you if you don't deal with it. That's the moral of the story. Okay, let's move on. What are some long-term capacity strategies? Well, one is to get into complementary goods and services, produced or delivered using the same resources available to the firm. So seasonal demand patterns of the resources are out of phase with each other. Many times that's when it's called upon to come up with some different complementary goods. You want to balance your seasonal demand cycles by using available excess capacity. So a fairly simple example of this would be lawn care services. We have these all over the East Texas area. So from, say, March all the way till probably September, they're busy doing people's lawns. You know, they cut grass, they trim trees, they trim bushes, they fertilize, etc. But then in October, November, December, January, the grass isn't growing. So what a lot of them are doing, they still got the workers, they still have the equipment, they still have the trucks. They start stringing Christmas lights and Christmas decorations because there's very little work to do because it's seasonal, okay? So that's an example of turning to a complementary good or service because of seasonal cycles of demand up and down. So here are the 4 capacity expansion options. These are listed at the top of your page 272. And we're going to talk about each one of these. So this is exhibit 10-6. So hold on just a minute. It might be easier to see in your textbook. So at the top left, you have the A, it's called A. You have one large capacity increase. This is where you decide to just double the size of the plant. B, top right, is a small capacity increases that match demand. That means as demand goes up, you slowly increase your capacity to try to match the demand. Bottom left-hand corner, the C part, is a small capacity increases that actually lead demand. In other words, you build it expecting them to come. You make small increases in your capacity, and then you expect the demand to eventually catch up and allow you to use that capacity. So an example might be you're slowly adding new machines, even though you don't need them, in anticipation that as your business expands, you'll be able to use those machines. And then the bottom right, D as in David, you have the small capacity increases that actually lag demand. So those are the four. So let's take a look at these. Advance to the next slide here. So the first one is the one large capacity increase. This is where you would decide to just double the size of the plant, make a very large capacity increase. The advantage here is that the fixed cost, that is expanding the plant, is only incurred one time, right? The disadvantage is the facility could be underutilized if the demand is steady. So if you don't have a huge increase in demand, then suddenly you find yourself with too much capacity, right? Okay, let's look at the next one. What about the small capacity increases that actually match demand? This one is usually referred to as the capacity straddle strategy, where you're trying to stay right on the fence. It will be short periods of periods of over and underutilization. So there'll be some times when you have too much capacity and sometimes when you have too little. The third one is small capacity increases that lead demand. This is called the capacity lead strategy. You will always have excess capacity. You will always have safety capacity to meet unexpected demand. So that probably is not a bad idea for some type of ventures. For example, let's take the U.S. military. My guess is that at all times we have more troops than we actually need, right? Because we're not at war. But we want to be ready in case a conflict arises, because it takes a long time to recruit people, train people, and deploy people, even if you already have them, right? So you always are training, you're always having people bring them up to a state of readiness, because you never know when they're going to be needed. So that's a capacity lead strategy. You always have a little bit more than you need because of the consequences of not having enough, right? So another one is a small capacity increases lag demand. This is called the capacity lag strategy. The result is you have constant capacity shortage. You never can meet the demand of the marketplace. Now, this requires less investment. It provides very high capability utilization. In other words, if you have the capacity lag strategy, your machines are going to be running 24/7, right? It's going to provide very high capacity utilization, and it provides a very high rate of return because you're being very efficient, right? However, because demand is so high and you can't meet it, you're going to have to turn to things like paying overtime or subcontracting out to other companies, and possibly you will lose productivity. And what could happen in the long run, it could erode your market position. so that you're no longer number 2. You have slipped to number 5 or number 10 or something like that. So that's the capacity lag strategy. It can work for a while, but in the long run, it can really harm you. So let's talk about short-term capacity management. Short-term capacity management. So there's some approaches here. One is adjusting your short-term capacity levels. And then another one is simply shifting and stimulating demand, trying to get more customers to come into the shoe store. So some adjusting short-term capacity level strategies. One is to add or share equipment. So for example, I know of a large nonprofit organization based in Colorado. They ran their own receipting firm. In other words, they received donations from the public, from different organizations to help them fund their revenue. So they had to receipt all of those individual and corporate donations. But then they discovered that there were other nonprofits that had the same process. So they simply partnered with other organizations and shared all of their staff, their equipment, their resources, their software. So they all started using the same receipting firm that would service all of them. Another way is to sell unused capacity. So for example, Eastman Chemical in the Longview plant, they have the capability there because of the offshoot of some of their processes. They can use the steam, they can use chemicals to actually generate electricity. They make so much electricity that they make enough to run the entire plant themselves. And then they still have electricity left. So what do? They sell it in the marketplace. They sell their unused capacity. Then another short-term adjustment could be changing the labor capacity and schedules. So an example there would be outsourcing, hiring somebody else to do part of the work for you. Also adding extra shifts. So not only do you have the swing shift, then you also have the graveyard shift. Or you could change the labor skill mix of your employees. That gives you more flexibility. So an example of that would just be simply cross-training your employees so that they can do multiple tasks. Then another one is to shift work to slack periods. So times when the employees are not busy, you give them other tasks to do. That would be a short-term capacity adjustment. So an example of that would be hotel clerks at night, let's say from 10 p.m. till 6 a.m. Most people are at their hotel, but they're asleep. So they don't have a lot to do. They're not checking in a lot of people. They're not having service requests or this sort of thing. So you have them work on paperwork. You're shifting the work that people would do to a slack period. And then you have a shifting and stimulating demand. What are some things that you can do to shift and stimulate demand? Well, one is to vary the price of goods and services. That's Black Friday, right? You want to jumpstart the Christmas shopping, so you simply slash everything to 50%. You provide customers with information. You advertise, you promote. You add peripheral goods and services. These are add-ons that can stimulate more purchases. Another way is to provide reservations. So what's a reservation? A reservation is a promise to provide a good or a service at some future time and future place. So an example would be surgeries. So with elective surgery, many times people will schedule that surgery weeks or months in advance. So airline seats, those are basically by reservation, right? Hotel rooms are typically by reservation. Really, if you want to apply this to a college course, when you register for a class for, say, next spring, you're basically making a reservation. There's only 25 seats in that class, and if you claim one of those seats, you have reserved your spot for that course, right? So this is another way to shift and stimulate demand. I think we will stop for today. So tomorrow we will continue this and finish up the chapter.